Welcome to carrot cake. And this carrot cake recipe and the shortcake and strawberry sauce recipe are all part of our tools and equipment unit. And so the nice thing about these labs is you're going to use processing equipment and you're going to use heavy equipment, and hopefully you'll be able to see the difference between the equipment types. All right, so to get started, what is processing equipment? Processing, it grinds, it slices, it purees. So we have some examples here. We have a food processor. We're going to use this to shred the carrots. When we do our strawberry sauce, you could use it at this, you could use a blender, or you could use an immersion blender, a mandolin. All of those are processing equipment. Heavy equipment is heavy. It doesn't move. An oven, it's heavy, doesn't move. Our industrial mixers back there, that's heavy equipment. It's not meant to be picked up and moved. Our little mix masters, though, are more processing because you can pick them up, move them, clean them, and all of that. So heavy really has to do with, meaning it's meant to stay stationary in one place. So we're going to start with carrot cake. And the first thing the instructions say to do is you need to get a round pan. And I got one where the bottom pops out, but some of them don't. It doesn't matter. And you need to cut a piece of wax paper to fit it. Now, some of the students like to just wing it. And then their wax paper's big, and they just shove some of this up in there. And then this cooks into the cake and defeats the whole purpose. The whole purpose of this is to form a barrier so the cake falls out. But if it's all sloppy, then it doesn't work. So the way you do this is you get your pan, you lay it down, and you trace around it with a pen, kind of like you did when you were in kindergarten. And it makes a mark on here. And then you get a pair of scissors, and I'm simply going to finish cutting this out to keep our demonstration moving swiftly. All right. Now, carrot cake is very rich, and it easily burns to the bottom of the pan. And part of that is because of all the carrots in there, and it also has a lot of richness. So we're going to make sure this doesn't stick. So I'm going to spray the bottom of the pan. Then I'm going to put the parchment paper in. And that's going to help it stick so it doesn't go up the sides of the pan when you're putting in your batter. And I'm actually going to spray this again. Okay? And that way our cake should fall right out when we go to bake. Okay? All right. The next step is we're going to mix together our dry ingredients. And this is pretty common in baking. You've already done this some. So for this recipe, you had to cut your amounts in half. And I've been teaching this class for quite a while, and students always measure the same ingredient wrong. They do everything right until it gets to the oil. So we're going to talk about the oil. Okay. And so that was our flour and our sugar. And we need to put in our cinnamon, all the dry stuff. Okay. And then here's our baking soda, and I believe our salt. So this might be our baking powder. This is our powder. And then here's our soda and salt. And we pre-measured all of this just to make it easier. You should have your recipe open while you're looking at this so that the directions make sense as we're doing everything. Okay. I'm going to use a fork to stir this. You could use a wire whisk, or if you had a sifter, you could sift them all together. Now the purpose of this is to make it light and airy so there's no lumps or clumps in the flour, and it's also to combine all of your ingredients together. You don't want all your cinnamon to be in one bite, or all your salt for that matter. Okay. So you get all of that mixed up. And so then the next thing you do is you put your liquid ingredients in another bowl. So we're going to add our oil. And again, this is the ingredient that many students measure wrong. The recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup, but you need to cut it in half. And 3/4 cut in half is 3/8. I'm not sure what the students do, but they always have way too much oil. Then as their oven bakes, it just completely boils over into a royal mess in the oven. And it's inedible. I think most of them end up doubling it instead of cutting it in half, which means they have 4 times as much oil. So To make this easy, you need 1/4 cup and 2 tablespoons. That's it. 1/4 cup and 2 tablespoons is the magic number. Okay? And you need 2 eggs. And the eggs need to be slightly beaten before you put them in there. So I'm going to crack these into a custard cup. And I'm just going to use my fork and slightly beat these before adding them to my oil. And this just makes them mix with the oil better, and then they mix better into your dry ingredients. Okay. Now, the next ingredient we need to add is our 1½ cups of shredded carrots. I will not need this many carrots. But first of all, carrots are a root vegetable, which means they grow in the ground. So when carrots are growing, this part is in the dirt, and then there's green leaves, that are above the dirt. So these have to be washed before you use them. So I washed them. Well, then we don't want this end in our cake. So you'll cut those ends off, and if they're, and then well is the other end. And now these are all ready. They've all been washed, and the ends cut off. Okay? Food processor. These are made, this is processing equipment, which is easy. Food processor is processing equipment. These tools are made so that you can never get your hand in here because they will destroy it. I mean, these are run with a high-powered motor. So there's a bunch of safeties built in. First, this is your bowl. You have to put it on and lock it. If it doesn't lock, it'll never turn on, and I'll show you that as we keep going. Okay, so that's locked on. These tools have fingers here, little holes, for you to pick up the blade so you're not actually handling the sharp part. And it's not perfectly round, so you may have to play with this to get it to drop down a little bit. Okay. If you look, this part has a piece of plastic that stands up. This one does not. This unlocks the safety in here, or locks it. All right, it locks into this groove. So if it doesn't lock, you can hear a click right there. That's the safety. If it doesn't click, the machine will not turn on. So if I turn this on right now, it works. If I unlock this just a smidge, it will not work. If I unlock the bowl, this will not even slide in. Everything has to be locked in before the machine will turn on. Okay. So we're going to put our carrots in through here. Now granted, if you were crazy enough, you could probably get your hand down here and it would shred your knuckles really bad. But that is obviously not being safe at all. You always want to read your instructions. Okay, so I'm going to get a couple of carrots, put them in here. This tool will help push them down. And I'm using the pulse motion, so it just shuts off when I'm done. And I have more than enough. Now, you saw how fast that was to shred? I shredded 6 carrots in a matter of 10 seconds. If you're making a lot of carrot cake, this is the way to go because it'll save you a lot of time. Okay, and I'm going to kind of use this as my dirty dishes bowl. And so now I can pop this off and measure. Okay. There's a cup, and that goes right into your liquid ingredients. And here's a half cup. Okay. I will just set this aside. All right, so I'm going to combine this. And now you combine your liquid with your dry. Now, this carrot cake is a much thicker batter than a white cake or a chocolate cake. It's not going to be as thin. A lot of students, I'm surprised, have never had carrot cake, but it is actually very, very good, and it doesn't taste anything like carrots. So no worries if you're not a big fan of carrots. It's actually very, very sweet. And I am going to switch to a rubber scraper because all the batter's just going to get stuck in the board. Now, you don't need to beat this to death, all right? You just want to mix it in until you can no longer see large amounts of flour or sugar, you know, the whole dry ingredients. The nice thing about this recipe, this batter, is that you do not need a mix master for it. We will use a mix master to make the frosting. All right, we're about there. Okay. All right, so we're going to spread this into our pan. Now, if your cake batter is pouring into the pan, you added way too much oil. That should be clue number one. There's really no sense in even baking it, because if it's too thin, it's going to boil over, and we're going to just scrape it off the parchment paper and put it into the garbage. It is a lost cause at that point. You have quadrupled the oil. Okay? 1/4 cup and 2 tablespoons. All right. So, to make this more efficient in the oven, you'll write your name on here. So I'll write Mrs. B, and it's actually easier if you use a marker. And then so I'll set this here, and we can get sometimes 5 groups cakes on one pan. All right, so they all fit in the oven, and if we know who they belong to when they come off the paper. So I'm going to put this in the oven, and it says that it bakes for about a ½ hour. In this oven that's closer to 20 minutes. So we'll set the timer for 20 and check it then. All right, we're back. Our carrot cake has come out of the oven. Okay, it just springs back at the touch. So we let this cool a little bit, because when baked products come out of the oven, they're very, very moist. They have a lot of steam in them. So we've let it sit. The pan is still pretty warm. All right, but I'm going to get it out. So you take a knife around the edge, and you go all the way around the edge here. And if you recall, we have paper on the bottom of the pan, so that should make that easy to flip out. And I'm still using pot holders because this pan is still pretty warm. Okay, and it fell right out. Okay. And now I'm just going to use this to kind of pick that up. Again, it's still very hot. This is our parchment paper. So you just peel that off, and you have a very nice flat surface to frost. Now, if you take a look at this, you can see it's still pretty moist here. The cake is done, but it needs to, some of that moisture is going to kind of get sucked back into the cake as it cools. And a lot of it will escape because it's steam. So you don't want to frost it when it's warm, because it'll just melt the icing. So we're going to frost these tomorrow in class, and I will see you then. Hi, welcome back to Carrot Cake, and today we're going to make our frosting and frost our carrot cake. So in the bowl, I have a ½ cup of softened butter, and a ½ cup is 1 stick, and 8 ounces of cream cheese. So the first thing we're going to do, and it needs to be soft. If it's really hard and just out of the refrigerator, your frosting is going to be very hard to spread. So I'm going to turn this on, and you mix those together and blend them. Now you blend them using the wire whip attachment on your Mix Master, so that it'll incorporate a lot of air and make it much easier to spread. Okay. And now I'm just going to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla. This is a very, very simple cream cheese frosting recipe. Cream cheese frosting is typically the icing that goes on carrot cake. I'm going to scrape this down just so that I get all of the cream cheese off the side of the bowl, and give it another quick mix before I start adding my powdered sugar. Okay, the recipe calls for 5.5 to 6 cups of powdered sugar, and it's not an exact measurement because it depends on how much moisture your powdered sugar is going to absorb. So the best icing is made with powdered sugar that has been sifted through a sifter. And I wanted to show you, if you don't have a sifter at home, you can use a wire whip, and you just kind of keep going through and letting that powdered sugar break through so that there's no clumps in it, and that will make your frosting much smoother. Okay, you don't want lumpy frosting. So I'm just going to start adding. This does not have to be super exact because you're going to judge it based on your icing. But I'm going to add a cup at a time on very low speed, because if you turn this on high, we're going to be in a cloud of sugar. Okay, we'll be right back while this we're back. And I've added 4.5 cups of powdered sugar, and I'm letting this mix so that it's nice and smooth. I would like to show you the consistency. This has to be thin enough that you can spread it, but it has to be thick enough that it holds its shape. So I personally like this consistency right here. So I am going to go with this. All right. And I'm just going to gently kind of tap this. You don't need to go real hard, but that'll get a lot of your frosting off of your wire whip attachment. Okay? All right. So one thing we're going to do is we are going to practice decorating a 2-layer cake. If any of you go into the baking industry, you will never frost just 1 layer of cake. It will always be 2 layers. So what we're going to do just for practice is we're going to cut this in half. Okay, and I'm going to throw on some gloves, and then since I'm handling food that's already been cooked, all right, and I am going to put a thin layer. I'm going to actually just take this one off and get it out of the way. All right, and I have a clean plate underneath here. All right, so I'm going to put a real thin layer of frosting here. Now, the best tool to use for frosting a cake is a straight edge spatula, okay? So I'm just going to get a little bit of frosting here and put a layer on here. Okay. Now, I'm one of those people that I love frosting, much more than I like the cake. All right, so for me, I'm going to put even a little bit more on there, so that it definitely separates the layers. Don't worry about it hanging over the edge here. Okay. And now I'm going to take my other layer and lay it right on top. Okay, so you can see you definitely get 2 layers. All right. Now this Lazy Susan is wonderful for decorating or frosting cakes, and you will use these more in the cake decorating unit as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to get some more frosting. Okay. And I'm going to put a thin coat on here. Now we're going to decorate this with pecans. So if you get a little bit of crumbs in your frosting, they will be covered up with your pecans. Okay. And you should have more than enough frosting in here to ice everything. Now you can put paper underneath your cake, so that if you get frosting on the plate, then you pull that paper out. And we'll show you that technique in the cake decorating unit. Okay. But you are on very limited time in this lab, so we want you to just get some practice frosting the cake. And then you guys will be dividing this up and cleaning up for the day. Almost done here. Okay, some of the students just like to put pecans on the top. Some like to put them on the sides and not on the top. Some just sprinkle them all over. All right, so right now for this purpose, I'm just going to put them on top to show you what this looks like. So you can take them here, and then you spread them out and just gently press them into the frosting. I do personally like it when it's either just on the top or just on the sides versus all over the cake. Some students add it to their frosting. That makes your frosting much harder to spread. All right, because it has all these little nuts in there. Okay? So again, you could do that, or you could just put it on the sides. And if this was a glass plate, you know, you could go around. I can just use my hand here and clean up the plate. Again, we will show you a technique in the cake decorating unit for keeping your plate very, very clean. So now you will cut this for your group and enjoy.